Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Lee McDonald, Director of Counseling, Health, and Wellness for the district. I'd like to welcome you to a special event, Coping with COVID, to help us all understand the impact of social media, specifically on adolescents and our children. If you're like me, you have at least one adolescent, if not two. I've got two middle schoolers that are active with their personal cell phones and social media. So I can personally attest to some of the challenges with this particular topic in light of our current circumstances during the COVID-19 pandemic. I do want to just mention that if you need anything from us, even though we are operating remotely now, we're here for you as a district, as administrators, as teachers, as counselors and whatnot. So please reach out. Certainly we'll have an opportunity tonight to take many questions throughout the presentation. We're going to open up the chat feature to make sure that you can do that. We may not get to all the questions right away, but we will have time at the end as well. So that's a couple things housekeeping wise. I'm also recording this presentation, so it will go up on the district website in the coming days on our YouTube channel. I'll also tweet it out via our social media page at WWP Counseling. That said, I'm joined by two esteemed colleagues this evening, Mr. Rick Cave, who is our Director of Technology, as one of our panelists this evening with us, and also Natalia Pietroske. Natalia is a Rutgers University behavioral clinician. She's housed at Community Middle School, but serves children in all schools. She's part of our partnership with Rutgers in providing mental health support services for students and families. So, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just a quick few things with regards to the agenda. We're certainly going to be talking about social media overall. Then we're going to hone in on social media and some of the realities that we face during COVID-19 pandemic and how you can support your children, how you can work with them to make sure that they're using it appropriately, and then what are some things you need to know to be aware of, what are some resources where you can go for assistance to keep yourself informed. We're going to share a clinical perspective. Ms. Pietroske will do that in a few minutes. We're going to talk through what you as a parent can do to support your children. We're going to have some questions for you that as a household, you're going to have to answer as you go through and navigate the world of social media. And then there's going to be certainly questions for us. So just in terms of social media, this is the most up-to-date data, at least that I could find, that's out there with regards to what people are using, and this is worldwide. So you can see, obviously, Facebook is pushing 3 billion users. I'm sorry, 200 and if I'm doing my math right, yeah, close to 3 billion. YouTube is also very popular. WhatsApp, Messenger. You go a little further down the line, you talk about Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter. Those are some of the things that we see adolescents on. When you hone in on the kind of middle school, high school age, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube. So those are some of the more popular ones, although I will say it's a changing landscape, to say the least. Every year things change, trends change. There's always new social media apps that are coming online. And we have some great resources we're going to share with you to kind of stay in the know about what those platforms are. So just a couple things. What is it about social media that concerns you the most? As I mentioned before, the chat is open. If you don't mind, just go into the chat and type in a few questions that you might have, but more concerns that you might have about social media. So take a minute to do that. So just a couple things for coming up in the chat. You know, certainly time, spending too much time on websites, on YouTube or Instagram, you name it. Cyberbullying, very real concern. Privacy issues, distractions, inappropriate conversations, things of that nature. Connecting with strangers, that's a good one. These are all really good things to think about as you talk about some of the realities and concerns. These are some of the current concerns that we brought forward as part of tonight's presentation, which we'll dive into a little bit. When you think about privacy, no question, we try to engage in digital citizenships and get our students to understand that they have a footprint. And once you put something out there, it's very hard to take back. It's really impossible, even if you have features in Snapchat where a video supposedly dissolves, but there's still, evidence. There's still people that can take screenshots and whatnot. So cyberbullying, trolling, sexting, those are very real concerns. And there are challenges in that kind of unstructured domain that students are in. So you have to be careful about that, and they need to engage in appropriate conversations online and protect themselves. The up-down comparisons, when you think about, when we look at social media, people are typically not posting their worst day, right? They're posting, a highlight from their day. They're posting that perfect picture. So there tends to be some of that anxiety that can come from that, and looking at somebody else's life compared to yours and making that comparison, which is not always healthy. So the social media depression, addiction, when you think about likes and trying to get as many followers and trying to get as much attention as possible, that's sometimes hard for adolescents to understand. And so they might cloud their judgment sometimes in what they post, and what they do online may not be the real person that they are. So, and that's where that feeds into the next one, disconnect from reality. Some of the things that you'll see where all of a sudden you're in that world, and there's not necessarily an awareness of what's real versus what's not. Certainly the anxiety, the self-esteem, the self-efficacy, these are all connected to those previous topics. Very important to think through. Body image, eating disorders. Again, there's a lot of things that adolescents are exposed to on social media, that we're all exposed to on social media, in terms of the messages that we receive, not only from other people, but from advertisements. So the sleep patterns, I know we're going to highlight this briefly, the power of that kind of blue light that keeps people up and can certainly impact a child's sleep patterns. And certainly social skills. There's things that you do online that you wouldn't necessarily do in person. There's not always that interaction for face-to-face conversations and the ability to articulate yourself in an appropriate manner. So all very good concerns brought forward. Thank you, everybody, for participating there. I'm going to turn it over to Natalia Piotrowski, who's going to dive into the clinical side, and I'm going to try to make sure I can get her video on. So
thank you, Lee.
You're welcome. I think I'm going to make you a co-host. Hopefully that will work for you to put your video on.
Okay,
Natalia.
should I try starting my video?
Please.
Yeah, I think it worked.
Great.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're discussing an important topic that is concern for many parents. As you see, social media, text messaging, video chatting, and virtual learning became an integral part of our lives today. Social media has a dramatic influence on many young people and poses unique challenges for us as parents and educators. And if you're worried about how exposure to social media and electronic devices affects your children, you're not alone. And first, I would like to provide a brief overview on effects of social media use on children and adolescents' mental health based on the research from 2019. And then I'm going to discuss in more detail latest trends of social media use and its impacts during pandemic. Well, the link between online activities and mental health symptoms is increasingly supported by the research. And several recent studies show that young users who spend more time on Instagram, Facebook, and other social media platforms have higher rates of reported depressive and anxiety symptoms than those who spend less time online. And more specifically, in the recent years, reports of depressive symptoms by 8th through 12th graders increased by 33%. That's a very high number. In addition, 3 hours of social media use a day is linked to depression in adolescents aged 12 to 15. And it is also important to note that with more time spent online, there is less time for social interactions and real life. And also research investigating how decreased amount of social interactions affect the brain is still fairly new, and more time is needed to learn about its long-term effects on our children. Obviously, that being more social leads to decreased sleep. While children spend more time online, they get less sleep, and recent findings show that teens who spend 3 hours a day on devices are more likely to get less than 7 hours of sleep, which is definitely not enough for that age group. Decreased amount of sleep could potentially lead to difficulty paying attention, lower grades at school, increased stress, and having difficulties in interpersonal relationships. The research also investigating impacts of blue light exposure on our eyes and brains and is still underway. But we need to be aware that blue light emitted from different screens can delay the release of sleep-inducing melatonin. It also increases alertness and reset the body internal clock to later schedule. So it's definitely disrupt the sleep. And the sleep is also interrupted by continuing notification and alerts that children may be receiving on their phones throughout the night. Then it is also known that social media promotes the idea of having an ideal body. Increased time on social media is associated with increased risk of reporting eating and body image concerns. Kids spend more time online looking at different images and posts of others, and very often they're not aware that these images are photoshopped and altered to look perfect. Kids naturally compare their lives with the life on the screen, images of others with their own, and it often happens that it promotes negative thoughts about themselves, not being happy or satisfied with the way they look, and development of negative body image. We also need to be aware that there are online communities exist that promote disordered eating, the thin ideal, and the kids use special names for them, such as anorexia, which are code words for eating disorders, anorexia and bulimia, which also allow them to talk openly about their symptoms. Also, research shows that the increased use of social media platforms is associated with anxiety triggering symptoms. It is believed that there might be a compare and despair factor at play. And when a person looks online at pictures of others, they're having great time, going vacations, driving more expensive cars, living good life. This comparing of life of others can lead to the development of fear of personal failure. And thoughts may come such as, I'm such a loser, I will never have a life like this, I'm not good or worthy of others, having a lot of negative thoughts. Lower number of likes is also associated and leads to development of negative thoughts, while positive likes, they create a good feeling of being liked. Seeing pictures of others having fun at the party when one was not invited or not being able to attend can also lead to the development of fear of missing out or FOMO. And it is something important to note. During the pandemic, the fear of missing out might be even stronger, as children might be seeing posts of their friends getting together with others and feeling anxious about not being invited to the party, or even having a conflict with their parents about not letting them attend the party, or having stricter social and physical distancing rules in the family. And now I'm going to discuss some recent trends in the use of social media during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, social media allowed us, yes, thank you, allowed us to connect with others. Sharing our experiences allowed us to reduce psychological distress associated with anxiety related to pandemic. Social media also allow for a quick distribution and easy access to important information about safety protocols, testing centers, personal protection equipment, and necessary home supplies. I personally use local mom Facebook group to get information about cleaning supplies available at the local stores. And at the same time, while all of these have positive sides, we also need to be aware that there is a high probability for the information to be false, inaccurate, and exaggerated, which could in turn lead to increase in fear, stress, depression, and anxiety. So what are some of the dynamics that we are seeing? There is definitely an overall increase in daily screen time, and that is due in part to virtual learning and also due to limited access for other screen-free activities during pandemic. As we already discussed, there are some concerns that parents are having about social media use. More parents voice their concerns about their children using Instagram and Snapchat than other social platforms. 68% of parents believe that social media affects their teens' ability to socialize normally as kids have less and less in real social interactions with peers. 56% of parents believe their teen has a healthy desire for attention, approval via social media. They're concerned about their kids' mood changing significantly after receiving likes or getting not enough likes or getting negative comments. And also parents attempt to enforce rules for smartphone and social media use. During this pandemic, about 80% of parents relaxed rules about social media, and also they became appreciative of what social media has to offer to their kids during quarantine time. There are also some positive aspects of social media use, such as promoting connectedness, entertainment. It is also used for creative outlets, and during this time it also provides us with a great possibility to work from home and engage in virtual learning. And we also need to be mindful about different motivations for social media use. Some kids use it these days to develop close relationships, new friendship, romantic relationships, increase their face-to-face contact, although it is still virtual. And definitely more research is needed to explore some other possible outcomes of social media use, such as increase in self-esteem, perceived social support, and safe identity exploration. And obviously there are some negative impacts of social media use. That will be on the next slide, such as decreased sleep, less physical activity, less time for schoolwork, reduced attention, less face-to-face interaction, and possible effects on healthy brain development. With the increased social media use, children are also more exposed to unhealthy need for approval or attention. They might be becoming sexualized too soon, not having enough personal privacy, and oversharing their personal information online. There might be an exposure to becoming a victim of sexual predators online, exposure to hate speech, and ability to focus and being bullied and bullying others. And next one, please. Lee, could I please have the next slide? Oh, I think you stopped sharing presentation. Yes, so to sum up, I would like to say that too much of anything can come with adverse consequences. Social media helps the students feel more connected with their peers, express themselves more freely, being more creative, and engage in virtual learning. However, an excess student can also feel more isolated, experience increased depressive or anxiety symptoms, and having less sleep. We need to be mindful that all screen time is not equal, and we can't look at it in terms of black and white thinking, or it all being good or bad. We as parents need to have an ongoing conversation with our children about their positive and negative experiences with social media, being aware that seeing red flags about compulsive use of electronic devices and social media. We need to consider and educate our children as well as what is the purpose of the online activities. Are those online interactions enhance their social supports and promote social connectedness, or are they mostly negative interactions focused on social comparisons and leading to negative feelings? And now the presentation will be continued by Rick Cave, our District Director of Technology.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I guess I have to, if you can switch me, Lee, on or not, you can leave it off, it's fine. My name is Rick Cave, and I want to welcome all of you here and thank you for coming out tonight. This is certainly a topic that is often on people's minds and ones that we have a lot of concerns with. Kids are certainly kind of showing us the way on how to do stuff with social media, and I think that sometimes that can be very intimidating. But I think it's important to realize that you have a lot to share with your kids, and it's important that you do share that information with them. So what I'm going to do for my segment tonight is it's basically titled, what can parents do? And I'm going to focus on some of the things that based on, we've had a number of discussions over the years with students and parents, and they provided feedback and sort of suggestions for us, the things that have worked with them and their families, and we're going to share some of that information with you. We also have some resources available that we'll be able to share with you so that you can kind of, as a takeaway and things that you can follow up on, certainly far more detail than we can cover, during this session. And really also to try and provide information just to help you make better decisions about, when to start this with your kids, when your kids should be doing this, when do they get a cell phone, all those really important questions that you have to kind of figure out how to deal with. This is actually, I think, even more challenging than normal, just because of the fact that given all the restrictions in terms of, seeing people and travel, and in many cases, people hunkering down in their house, it turns out about the only way you can, for many people, to have any sort of interactions is through some either social media or some type of technology. And I think that just adds an extra layer of, makes it a little bit more challenging for kind of keep track of everything that's going on. So, we realize that's certainly a problem that's out there that we have to deal with. But again, best practices and good solid foundational work will help in dealing with that. I just want you to know that the district, we obviously provide a lot of technology for the kids, and, Lee kind of mentioned some of it earlier, talking about some of the things we do in the classrooms and training kids. And we have many filters and things on our, on our devices. And if you really wanted to find out more information about that, you can just reach out to me directly. We can talk, or I can share some of that things that we do. But the focus on tonight is really kind of focusing on what you can do in your homes to try and just create a really good, solid learning environment for your kids as they work into the world of social media. So to start us off, I'm going to ask Lee if we have a little poll we'd like you to take. And if Lee can share that poll with you, if you would just answer that question, there they are. There's the results as they come flying in. And it's basically just asking you to select which one of the platforms you've actually used. And this is just trying to get a sense of your experiences online and what you're kind of seeing and what you're doing out there online. Just take a moment to let this fill up a little bit. Again, this is anonymous. We aren't gathering any information on anybody, so don't feel like you have to worry about that. Privacy is obviously something that's fairly important to us, so please just go ahead and just select. And it's just more or less trying to get a sense of what people are using and what's most popular. And as you can see, and this is good. It's pretty consistent. Facebook is obviously very popular. LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and are ones that are very common, especially with the age bracket that we're dealing with that we've looked at. No one's seeing Tumblr, I see, and no one's at Reddit, so that's kind of interesting. I think the thing as we go through this and you start to see the amount of people who use these resources and use these different platforms, I think one of the things that we all have to keep in mind as we talk about social media is that there's a reason it's really popular, and the reason it's really popular is because it works. It does what it says it's going to do. And even though there is a dark side to it, there's no question, and there's things that there are concerns out there on how, what goes on, there's also an awful lot of good that happens through social media. So it's a question of how do we allow our kids to actually leverage this tool to their advantage and avoid the pitfalls that can occur. And that's kind of what we're going to go through tonight. So I guess we can stop that, Lee, and move on to That one. Beautiful. Let me see. Is that in my way too? Okay. Basically, this is somewhat of a complicated chart. I apologize for that, but I just wanted to give you a sense of, these are sort of the popular ones that popular sites that Lee had, mentioned earlier. And if you take a look, you can see that the blue bars represents, the age bracket from 18 to 24, and the bigger the number, the bigger the bar, that's telling you there's a higher percentage of students or people of that age bracket using that particular social media platform. And the thing that I think this really shows is, if you look at the last two on the right, Instagram and Snapchat, those are by far used by younger adults than older adults. And what happens is, I think as you go through this, you will find that as the people age up, each new age bracket finds their little social media platform. And that makes it hard on us, because we get comfortable in a social media platform and suddenly there's something else that's coming along. If you go to the next slide, Lee. For example, there's two that I just wanted to point out. TikTok, which has been in the news for a lot of different reasons, but has just exploded in terms of use. It's now up over 800 million users, and it's exploded over the last 2 years to reach those numbers. It's something that if you look at usage of TikTok by people over 35, it's almost non-existent, and it's because it's just something that is tied in with that group. The other one that's next to it was one that I actually just found out about very recently. It's called Marco Polo. And even though it's hardly used, it's hardly known, it has over 11 million users. So it is pretty amazing, of almost, at least 100 really well-recognized social media platforms out there. And there are just millions of people using these things. So regardless of the platform you use, there are a lot of people out there who are actually going to see it and be a part of it. By the way, Marco Polo, for those who don't know, it's really kind of an interesting social media platform. What it is basically is video text messaging, so that you just send a short little video, and it's just like a text message. It's sent to the person, and whenever they read it or see it, they will make a response and send it back to you. So it's kind of an extension, a more visual representation of regular text messaging. So as you're going through this and all this stuff is flying at you, really the question becomes, things are changing so fast. How do we keep up with all this? That's really the challenge, because even if you, get to know something really well and are very comfortable with it and are actively involved with it, suddenly, like I said, something like a TikTok or a Marco Polo shows up, and you know nothing about that, or may not know much about it. And I can tell you that if you really want to be able to be aware of what's going on, you have a tremendous resource in your house, and that resource is your kids. I mean, they are the ones who are finding this stuff. They are the ones who are engaging this stuff. And so if you can develop open communication with them and be able to talk to them and sort of talk about these things, it's going to give you an opportunity to kind of learn more about what's out there. I think back to, my kids are older, unlike Lee. Our kids are out of the house actually now. But I do remember when my daughter first wanted to get Facebook, her first Facebook site. Basically, our rule for her was, yes, you can get it, but we have to be a friend of yours, which of course meant we had to get, my wife and I had to get a Facebook site. So that was actually our introduction to it. So that was something that really helped us just sort of get a sense of what she was doing in her life, but also what we learned conversely is that it gave her an avenue into what we were doing in our life, because we started to post some stuff on Facebook, because social media can be a fun thing to use. So the best place to start is communication. And that means a couple things. One, be a role model. So your kids are watching, your kids are following, so how you are using social media, they are learning from you. And even though they may not admit it, they are seeing what you do, and they may have a sense of, what you're doing. And that's why I say, when we created that Facebook page and we realized that, not only were we able to follow along with what our daughter was doing, if we started adding things to it, she could kind of follow along with us. So that became an opportunity for us to say, this is what we should be doing. This is how you should be acting in that environment. Also, if you can have that lines of communication, it's an opportunity to learn together. And what I mean by that is you learn more, especially about, the new technologies out there, but also they will learn. They're always going to need you to provide guidance in how to do things and what's right and what's wrong, because kids are kids. Don't ever get the misunderstand that their comfort level with technology in these digital world does not mean they have an expertise necessarily in this digital world. Certainly some of them are very good at it, but a lot of them are just very comfortable with it. And it's nothing more than they are not hesitant to, try something new, whereas, maybe we are, those of us who are a little bit older, are a little bit more hesitant. So it gives you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what they're doing. It gives you an opportunity to participate with them. So again, you can get a better sense of the things that they're doing, and also give them opportunities to have discussions. Because when you see stuff that they do online and you may say, hey, this is maybe not appropriate, or maybe not even the way you would have done it, it's an opportunity for a conversation. It doesn't have to be, punitive in any way, shape, or form, but at least an opportunity to share some different perspectives on what their intention was and what the perception is on the other end. All right. One of the things when I think about, having conversations can be hard, or just, what is it you need to talk about? Because again, I think a lot of people get caught up in the idea of, I need to be an expert to, provide any sort of information to people. And you really don't, because this is a social media. So, and you, in many ways, you are an expert in socialization, certainly far more of an expert than they are in how to socialize. And I think that those are things that you should always keep in mind. I use this slide. It's something I remember. It's from a book that's fairly old. And it's called "All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten." And the point of the book is essentially that so much of our interactions with people are just based in some very, very simple, concepts that you could teach to a kindergartner. And I think the same thing applies for social media, is that, there's some just very, very simple concepts. There are things, it's very easy to hide in social media, and I think that's one of the things that people really like about it. And so you may say things or do things or post things that they would normally not do if they're in a face-to-face situation. But I think it's important people understand that it's really not that much different, because probably the biggest difference about social media is not just the anonymity of the environment, but also the fact that, when you post something, it goes out to a large number of people. It's really different than, sitting around the lunch table with 3 of your friends and maybe sharing a joke or saying something that may not be very nice, but it's shared amongst 3 friends. That's very different than posting something, even as I said, here's something like Marco Polo, which is a very, low-end social media platform, but it still has 11 million users on it. If something were to go out through there, you're going to impact a lot of people. And those are the kinds of discussions to have with kids. Those are things that you want to talk about, is that it's not just going between you and one person. It could be going out to a whole bunch of people, and therefore there are repercussions for that. One of the other things that when talking with, kids about what's appropriate and inappropriate, someone told us to me once a while ago, and I've always liked it, and that was basically, if you're going to put something online, would you show it to your grandparent? And I've always thought that was a really interesting way of putting it. Is it something you are proud of? Is it something that you really want to share, or are you just doing it to be mean? So it's, again, trying to kind of get that idea of giving it a context outside of, I'm just going to write it on this computer and magically it's going to appear somewhere, because what you're doing has value and weight to it, and you have to make sure that the kids are following the rules. The other thing that is important to remember, and I think sometimes as we want our kids to grow and expand, we sometimes forget that we're the parent. This is our house. I always like to say, I know in the fall, which we didn't get to do it this year, but normally we have a meeting with all the parents who have, in 5th grade parents who want to come, they don't have to come, who are the first year that we do the one-to-one. So the first year where we give the students the Chromebooks and they can take them home. It starts in 5th grade, and we always have a meeting to talk about that and expectations for them, for the parents, as well as their kids for the year. And during that meeting, I always like to, at one moment, just kind of stop and sort of deputize the audience and say, look, you need to understand something. The Chromebook your child's taking home with you is not theirs. It's mine, really, the district's. But I'm deputizing you to say, it's now in your house. When it's in your house, it's your rules. And I think that's something that's very important to remember. You know, I know we want our kids to have privacy, but it is still your house, and it's still, you're still their parent. You still have the ability to monitor and control what they're doing, and you have the right to ask that. And certainly you have the right to control the use of their devices. So please don't ever hesitate in that environment. Again, I'm not saying that to just walk in and take things away, just to, as a, you know, kind of, if you're mad at them, but have as a conversation. But it's always something that can happen. I mean, I know with our kids, you know, we always occasionally had to do some of that where things got, you know, maybe gone too far, and we had to say, hey, we're going to take a break from it for a little while. But there's always why, and, you know, the fact that, you know, there are repercussions for how people are using their devices. Next one, Lee. All right, so some of the things that you should be aware of that you need to kind of take care of. Number one is passwords. And this is, I don't just mean for your kids, I mean for yourself as well. You want to make sure your passwords, you know, you use passwords, they're good passwords. They're not like your address, the name of your pet, you know, what school you went to, the kind of the obvious ones. People will always guess that stuff. But you want passwords, and you want to make sure they're not shared, that you keep them protected. You don't keep them on a little post-it note and stick it under your computer, because you want to create a little bit of privacy. And it's not just for the fact of you creating privacy yourself, but it's also, again, establishing best practices and a role model for what your kids should be doing, because your kids should not be sharing their passwords. That is actually something that creates a lot of issues. You know, two kids, especially, you know, in middle school, will have their best friend and they'll share their password with them, and a week later they're suddenly hated enemies, and that person now knows their password, and bad things can happen because of that. So again, best practices, it's something to be very, very, you know, protective of. Also, because of all the work that's going on at home right now, you should also be sure to, if you're using a computer that is a community computer, and I think in many households, most of the computers are community computers, you should be careful not to just save all your passwords in the computer, because again, then if someone were to come and use it, they can actually log in as you and pretend to be you, which again is not something that you want to have happen. So again, that's best practice. Be very, very careful with that. Website filtering, the district does a lot of that kind of stuff, but also there's ways that you can do some filtering in your house as well, and I'll have some resources on that at another time. Time limits, you know, on terms of just use, it's something I definitely think should happen, and definitely I think it's something probably a lot of kids need, is just to kind of give them some guidelines to make sure to say, hey, you just don't get to do this all the time. You know, monitoring some of their stuff either by looking over your shoulder, having a conversation about it. Again, there are also, we have some technical ways to do it, which we're going to mention that kind of later. And establishing a charging location. I think it's really important that, you know, especially with the younger kids, you know, the advice, you shouldn't really be going in their room. It's just a distraction. They don't need to be looking at stuff until 3 in the morning. You know, create a very public space. I know with younger kids, it's also a really good idea to always have people working in a public area. So it's in the family room with everybody else, it's sitting around the kitchen table with everybody else. And, you know, if you can sit there and join in with them, that would be great as well. Again, establishing those kind of guidelines and sort of best practices that they can kind of follow as well. So the next slide is a slide that talks about some different resources that are available to you to kind of look up. Because again, we're not really going to talk about the details of how to do some of the technical things that can happen. These resources will provide an opportunity if there's those things that you want to kind of look into a little bit more. And just to kind of review, and actually I forgot to mention one thing on the resources page here. The very first one, Common Sense Media, is a phenomenal website. It is an organization. They are basically there to help parents deal with all this digital stuff. As best I can tell, they really don't have a political leaning in either way. They have for example, one of the things that they do is movie reviews, where essentially what they tell you is exactly what the content of the movie is like. You can make a decision of whether or not it's appropriate. The same thing with video games. There's a lot of things on there on how to talk to your kids about cell phone use, how to talk to your kids about social media, you know, what's appropriate to put on social media, you know, what bullying looks like. There's some very, very good resources on there that will kind of help you as you kind of work through all this and give you a kind of place to go. The other 3 resources are specific for if you find you get yourself in a situation, because sometimes kids have, can be really challenged by this and kind of controlling this, and it can be a little bit more difficult. There are things you can do. For example, this one here, the cell phone monitoring apps, they provide a way for you to add an app to the cell phone, which will give you a lot of access into the cell phone, from everything from seeing all their text messages to knowing exactly where they're located to seeing all the browsing that's going on. This particular link is just to a review of the different monitoring apps that are out there, including there's a fee associated with those. They usually are not that difficult to set up. So you can, that's one resource. Also, your cell phone provider often has those kinds of resources available, just like the last 2, which are for Fios and Xfinity. Your internet service providers, they have resources for things that you can do on your internet connection in your house, as far as, when people can get on, where they can go, kind of monitoring what's going on. Even having, you can set up updates and prompts so that you can get notifications when things are happening. So again, all those resources are readily available to you. Some are more complicated than others. Many of them can be set up without extra technical expertise, and almost all of them come with, some sort of online support to help you figure out how to set them up and make decisions on what you really want to do and what you want to monitor. The last slide that I have here is actually something which was I thought was always kind of interesting. In the past, when we've done a couple of these presentations similar to this one, we had the opportunity to get a couple of students to kind of talk about their perspective on all of this. And it was really, really interesting, because the thing that I took away from it was, they sort of admitted that, they like having freedoms, but they also recognize that, they don't need all of the freedom in the world, and that there is a need for some control and monitoring and those kinds of things. But the other piece that they really talked a lot about was, making sure that it's a communication as much as possible. If you can start off by giving them opportunities to be involved in the discussion of, what is appropriate, what is inappropriate, how much you can use your cell phone, what is appropriate website that you should be going to, can I watch these YouTube videos? So those are all, it was really interesting hearing, from their perspective, how helpful it was for them to have those communications, and how much they really respected, when the parents, and actually in this case, they were even talking about teachers, were practicing good practices and, providing good roles for them to follow, so that they had a sense of what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. That is kind of everything that I have basically for just talking about, some of the different things, and my soapbox speech, as I like to say, for saying, please get involved, because, this is something that, social media does not show any signs of going away. It is something that kids flock to, very much so. They really, really like it, but they're still kids, and they still need guidance, and they still need help. And anything you can do to help them, do this appropriately is just going to make things better for all of us, really. Also, if you have any questions in particular, I think Lee had mentioned that previously. If you had some questions you wanted to throw into the chat, we might get an opportunity to talk about those. This last section was some questions we really wanted you to think about before you talk to your kids. Because I think these are things that you need to kind of, and it's actually questions not only just to talk with yourself, but, with friends and other people who are going through the same thing, to try and get an understanding of, trying to have a sense of where you want to start. And this is also some of these questions, actually, the information in the Common Sense Media website provides a lot of background information that sort of helps give you, like, when are kids ready for a cell phone? Why should they get a cell phone? What's the reason? What do they need it for? What kind of skills, social skills, do you think that they need in order for them to get one? Same thing with social media. It's not so much that if someone just reaches a certain age, as much as the way they're behaving and kind of, as they're maturing, what the kind of things that they should be thinking about. So, the questions that, some of the things that you should be really talking about, thinking about to yourself is, what is the appropriate age for someone to have a cell phone, and have you prepared them, for that responsibility of using it? Same thing with the social media. Cell phone and social media, kind of go hand in hand. They are, there's a lot of overlap in them, but they are in some ways two different topics, because the cell phone gives, is something that's physical, it's easy to sort of take away, whereas social media, there's a lot of different ways for them to get onto social media. And also, one of the things, going back to my idea of just, with what I always learned in kindergarten kind of idea is, the responsibilities that we're talking about for social media are not responsibilities, unique only to social media. It's just, please and thank you, and how to be nice to your friends and neighbors. And the second set, Lee, was, oh, and this is just, again, as you think about introducing these things to, your kids and letting them start to use it, what are the guidelines for that? And sort of have a sense of what those guidelines are when you're kind of going in, before you start having that conversation. Again, it's really a great idea. I've seen it done, and it works fairly well, is, letting the kids help develop the guidelines themselves. I always remember the times that we've had a number of teachers who said when they talk about class rules, I realize it's not exactly the same, but these are elementary school teachers, and they're asked their kids to establish class rules, and they'll help them. The teacher will work with the class to develop these class rules. And so often teachers will say it's amazing to them how oftentimes the kids are more strict than the teacher was in the development of these rules. So again, I think it's a really nice way to kind of open the doors to those to that communication. Yeah, I see a question in there talking about the presentation. That is going to be shared. I believe Lee said it's going to be posted, I forget where, on the district website. Hopefully we can bring that back. And, that's why a lot of the information in there is we put the links in there into the presentation, so you could kind of take a look at it, and that would give you opportunity to, access that information.
Yeah, we do have a Parent University link on the district website if you go under departments, under counseling, there's a link there for Parent University. So I would expect in the coming days, we will post not only the video from tonight, but we'll also post the PowerPoint. And Ms. Piotrowski shared with me today a great resource from childmind.org, a nonprofit specifically on talking to your children about social media, talking to them about being online. Having lived through this with my own children, I have a middle school daughter who's in 8th grade. She's got a smartphone. My wife and I went back and forth about when would she be ready, to have the phone, and then there was a whole part about social media. And it was a struggle, because it was, all of her friends have the social media, right? All of our friends have TikTok and Instagram. So exactly kind of what Rick said, we laid ground rules, we had conversations. My wife uses the TikTok more, so they have found a way to connect on that. I'm on Instagram, I follow her. So, there's an ongoing conversation. We've also had the conversation about, the digital footprint, about saying something or texting something. And, hey, their kids are going to make mistakes, and hopefully kind of work with them and be that guide, but also give them a little bit of autonomy, build that trust and rapport, have open, honest conversations. I really think that's the best way to do it. And not to say that we've done it perfectly, because we've certainly, making our mistakes, and we're going to continue to do that. It's just, it's having that open dialogue, I think, is really critical as parents.
The other thing I would add to that is, again, as I said, our kids are older, and it's really kind of fascinating now seeing them as they're going into real life, as we like to say. But, the connections continue in the social media world. It was really, it's different. It's almost, instead of in the past, like I said, originally started as a way to sort of monitor and see what was going on. And now it's become, as they've moved further away, and it's become a social media platform for us to connect with our kids, which is a really nice thing. So I think it was having the good foundation established early on has helped grow that to make it even more positive as they've gotten older.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump into some of the questions here and we'll all kind of chime in. We answered about the presentation. Um, Somebody's wondering about how many hours of to be online during COVID. Uh, you know, my son is on FaceTime all the time. Look, I just say it is a real challenge because we're all on devices probably way more than we want to be, right? So certainly our kids are as well, especially if they're working remotely predominantly like the entire district is right now. So they're on devices all the time. And then how do you balance that? How do you give them some space to get exercise, to get outside, to get off the screen time? I don't know that there's an exact answer for every child, but I think it goes back to just having that balance and not being on all the time and providing like purposeful breaks, right? So, I think that's really important to have those conversations. Somebody asked, would you consider watching TV screen time when trying to limit screen time? Again, that's you know, our kids are a lot of, I know, my kids are watching YouTube, right? A lot. So I do consider that screen time. TV, YouTube, you name it, that's certainly screen time. Where they're glued to television. That's their sole focus. So
That's kind of the new TV anyway.
exactly. Um, Somebody did ask about just in terms of addressing the social media allows children sometimes to explore various personalities and behaviors in an anonymous fashion. Gives them permission that they may not have an open society. Alternative profiles, one with parents, one without. So, I mean, I think that's where going to Common Sense Media is a really good resource. There are definitely, there's things that people can do to hide apps on their phone, right? To hide that information from parents or whomever they don't want to see it. There's alternative profiles. If truth be told, you can go on and create an anonymous profile. And that is one of the challenges. And I think that's where the conversations and educating yourself about what some of those things are that happen out there. I don't know if the others have anything to add to that.
No, I mean, it's it is a really hard thing. That's why I just say, as much as you can learn about it, I think it's just a tremendous advantage because um, there's a lot there. As Lee said, there's ways to hide stuff on their phone. There's ways to try and hide a lot of things that they do. I know, even cases where some people would create let's say you had a Facebook site and they let you be your friend on their Facebook site, and they had a second Facebook site that they didn't tell you about, and it is hard, but that's why, like I said, is as you get to know your kids and what works, you have to start to look at, all the options on what you can do to sort of get find out what they're doing. And it may be that, they need some sort of monitoring stuff, or maybe it's just straight conversation and listening to their friends. It's just as so much with raising kids, it's hard to say. And unfortunately there isn't I am unaware of the place that has all the answers. So it's kind of we all have to kind of work through and figure it out best for our families and ourselves and our kids.
And one of the last questions was just with regards to that exact point. How do you, if you're not necessarily a social media user yourself, how do you kind of educate yourself? And I think that's where you've got to just, if you go online, there are a lot of really good resources. As I said, the Common Sense Media is a great place to start. There's some other online links that were in the PowerPoint that Rick mentioned earlier as far as resources on having conversations and then just educating yourself. You don't have to be an expert. You can simply just have an awareness, and then truth be told, you engage in that conversation with your kids. Your kids will tell you a lot about their experiences on social media, and you can learn a lot from them. I know with my kids, I certainly have.
You had a question about district incorporating topics discussed tonight in curriculum with students. I mean, I know that obviously in the computer-based technology classes, it shows up a lot in there. I think also you see some of that in Yeah, it just left me. A health class, I'm sorry.
Yeah, health, it's definitely in our health curriculum at different grade levels. I know our school counselors also incorporate, digital citizenship into their push-in classroom lessons, starting really at the middle school level, and getting kids to understand the realities of being online. We incorporate that into our harassment, intimidation, and bullying, school culture and climate work. So it's definitely embedded within various curriculums across the district. But again, I think it's never enough. So if you're having that conversation at home, that's just going to reinforce that, and you're informing that. The school is going to continue to do their part and continue to find ways to engage kids in conversations. And truth be told, when things do happen online, if there's a situation, we're about trying to find that opportunity for learning, try to provide that opportunity for growth and reflection. I think that's really important. Kids are going to make mistakes, and by all means, they should, when appropriate, be held accountable. But I think anytime there are situations, it's really important to give them the opportunity to reflect and learn from their mistakes, as we all do.
Oh, did you see the challenge question was put out there? How do you handle the situation when you're setting the rules for your kids, but your parents or your friends may not set the same rules?
Tell me about it. Yeah, it is a challenge. I think that's, and sometimes you do have to hold the line. And hey, different families, but you respect the differences, right? And sometimes there are compromises too. There's a conversation about that, and there's a dialogue there where it's not just always my way or the highway. It's not easy, as we all know, just being a parent and having those conversations. But I think it's letting them know that, hey, you do have ground rules. You do have to have difficult conversations. There's some things that are non-negotiable. And I think at the end of the day, when you have that, there is some give and take with kids. I think they'll respect you a little bit more as well, and being able to have that conversation with you. So I think that's really important.
I think it's also important to remember kids sometimes use exaggeration. And so when they say all their friends can do it, it's probably
Right.
not true. It's probably not all of their
Fair
friends.
point. Yep.
It may be a couple. Also remember someone said, they cherry pick which rules they want you to copy. So, it's like you say, all right, well, let me know all of the rules that they're held accountable to, and do we want to discuss them all? Or are you just going to pick the ones that, you like or are easier or a little bit less strict than ours? But I think, that is a very challenging, that's a parent question. That's just, yes. As Lee said, it's hard.
It is. I think that is all of the questions. I'm just thinking. What time should a 16-year-old be off the devices and go to bed? That's a great question. I would start the conversation on, how much sleep does that child need, right? If you look at American Pediatrics, you can probably find that data pretty quickly online, and that, they should be sleeping 9-10 hours a night to really maximize their energy, their wellness, their learning, all of those things. So I certainly get that teenagers tend to go to bed late and get up later, but I think it starts there, and then realizing what the social media can do for you if you are continuing to engage after hours. Ms. Piotrowski mentioned the blue light. There's a very reality. There's a reality. There's a lot of studies that have been done about that. Kind of keeping that mind connected is not a good thing, right? We need opportunities to disconnect, right? So buying a few books and giving them books to read and pulling that phone away. I had to do it many times. I've done the things that Rick mentioned earlier, where we have a common charging station in the house that's not near the kids' bedrooms, it's not in their bedrooms. And I've had some nights where I've, given a warning, and then I've gone in and just said, give me the phone. That's it. Give me the phone. And then they got to come find me the next day to get the phone back. So, then they start to get the message. But sometimes you have to do that. It's not easy.
And the other thing is to remember that the rules don't have to be the same Monday through Sunday. You know, when
Right.
you say what time should 16-year-old be off a device and go to bed, depends. You know, is the next day a school day? They have homework.
Yep.
Is it Saturday? Are they doing something in a club or a competition or something on the next day? You know, it's not a black and white type of answer or question, I think, because of, you know, it's there's a lot of different things, and it's also an opportunity, especially 16-year-old. I think it is an opportunity to start slowly opening the door for a little bit more freedom on some things, just to kind of experiment with. As they age, you know, they're going to take on a little bit more responsibility, you know, with guidelines and with bumpers, so to speak, so that they don't hurt themselves. But even still, it's just an opportunity to maybe let them be involved, and hopefully they'll go make good decision. If they don't, then you have to pull back.
Great. Well, I want to thank our panelists this evening. It's been a pleasure having this presentation. We'll certainly get this up and on the district website in the coming days. My email here, lee.mcdonald@wwp.org. So feel free to reach out if you have further questions. We can be of further assistance. We'll get these resources and presentation online posted as soon as possible, and appreciate you joining us here this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.